afternoon, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to In Focus. Today we're putting housing on First Nations in focus. And we'd like you to join in on our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus and use the hashtag housing, or email infocus@aptn.ca. For our viewers and our listeners on Element Radio in Toronto at 106.5 FM and Ottawa at 95.7 FM. Before I introduce you to our guests, let's set the scene. Cat Lake First Nation has called the
chief of Cat Lake First Nation says the Minister of Indigenous Services needs to see the community's housing crisis for himself.
To us, it's really, really critical. And it's life-threatening. We've lost elders from respiratory problems. And we've lost children. They can't go to school because they have skin diseases.
In January, Cat Lake declared the state of emergency because of the poor housing conditions that are making kids like Lucas Mezite so sick they have to be medevacked out for treatment. Chief Kiwikabo said the ministry responded by sending officials to meet with them last week. They were shown pictures of the skin conditions affecting kids like Lucas and this 2-year-old baby who also lives in a home infested with mold. This week there was another meeting, but with NDP Member of Parliament Charlie Angus and MPP Saul Mamakwa. They toured several homes in the community of about 700 people.
What I can't get over is the complete breakdown of health that I've seen. We need a full medical assessment in this community. There's people suffering from all manner of ailments that have to be related to the breakdown of health and from the constant exposure to black mold.
The leadership here says that constant exposure to black mold has been an ongoing concern for years. There are at least 60 families in Cat Lake who need housing.
And that's pure mold. It is pretty obvious to say that the whole entire ceiling itself is.
A recent inspection of over 100 houses funded by Indigenous Services revealed what community leaders already knew. And that's just a visual inspection. Councillor Derek Spence says there's more you can't see.
Because once opening up these walls, it would expose a lot of the mold, and we can't really do that.
You know, the government has seen this before. They've known about this. They've done nothing. A crisis of this magnitude doesn't just happen. This is the result of the indifference of what we've seen at the Department of Indian Affairs and previous ministers.
As Angus and Mamakwa met with Chief and Council, newly appointed Minister Seamus O'Regan released a statement saying that plans to help Cat Lake are underway, including establishing a community plan to replace homes that have been identified for full replacement.
There hasn't been any timelines or dollars, so we have nothing to work with moving forward.
Kiwikabo says part of their action plan includes bringing in 40 mobile homes on the Winter Road for the families most affected by the mold. But that will require immediate funding from the government. Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Cat Lake First Nation.
Earlier today, we spoke with the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, MP Dan Vandel, about Cat Lake and the housing crisis on First Nations. Here's that interview. Mr. Vandel, thanks for joining us. Can you give us the latest as you know it from what's taking place for Cat Lake First Nation?
Well, first of all, the people in the community of Cat Lake have always been a priority in all of our discussions. We are working directly with them. The minister has spoken directly to the chief on the priorities, and I know that we are prioritizing fixing the housing repairs that we've brought forward. There is a community medical specialist who's going to be in the community today to do an assessment of the medical concerns on Cat Lake, and we will be completely following up on those priorities.
Cat Lake is in the news right now, but as you know, this has been taking place in First Nations across the country for some time. How did it get to this point?
Well, the reality is that this is a result of generations of underfunding. It's a result of 10 years of cuts by the Harper government, and when we came to power in 2015. Since then, we've invested close to $17 billion of new money, $17 billion over and above what's in the department line items for Indigenous services. We are investing that in infrastructure, in housing, in water treatment, and we are getting results, but the deficits in First Nation and Indigenous communities are so profound and so deep that it's going to take years and years of similar investment to actually just catch up.
The Assembly of First Nations estimates 85% of homes on First Nations are in need of repairs. What can be done here to address this?
We are the first to admit that the gaps are not acceptable. In First Nation reserves alone, we have invested $1 billion since 2016, and we have another $2 billion in the budget, including a distinctions-based housing policy for First Nations. I believe it's $600 million over 3 years. For Métis, it's $500 million, and for the Inuit, it's $400 million. It is absolutely a priority for us. We are investing in housing and infrastructure, in water treatment, but the reality is that the deficits are so great because of years of neglect that we just need to continue investing in the way we were doing for a longer period than 4 years. It's going to take another 10 years to catch up. And when those situations reach the crisis level, we hope that we can do prevention work before they do reach the crisis level. But unfortunately, that's not always the reality in Indigenous communities, and we're doing our best to respond. But I think the real solution is long-term investment in infrastructure, in water, in housing, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Mr. Vandel, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us here
today. My pleasure.
Joining us now via Skype, we have NDP Member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay, Charlie Angus, and also via Skype is Derek Spence, a councillor from Cat Lake First Nation. Thank you both for joining us here today. Councillor Spence, if we could start with you. As we heard, Cat Lake has called a state of emergency over housing. We've heard lives are at risk, and we've seen the heartbreaking photos of the children there. Can you provide us with an update on where things are at?
Well, we've been talking back and forth with the government, but we haven't really had anything written and with any commitments. But over the phone, they have committed to visiting our community and meeting with us. So with that being said, we're supposed to be meeting today, but apparently there was some weather delays in Toronto. And this is the kind of thing we face here on the reserves, where we have weather delays with our people trying to get out on medevacts and trying to get out to medical appointments.
Yesterday, you also called an emergency declaration of Jordan's Principle. Well, what led to that? Well,
the inspections that were done, it brought out a lot of things, and we started going to the people that we figured had medical conditions, but there was so many kids that had a lot of similar medical conditions connected with the mold issues, like skin conditions, respiratory problems, and this is why we call that Jordan's Principle, so we can get these children looked at as soon as possible.
MP Angus, what's your understanding of declaring this emergency of Jordan's Principle? What should be taking place when that happens?
Well, we know that the federal government fought, this government, the Trudeau government, fought against the implementation of Jordan's Principle. There were 3 non-compliance orders. They spent millions in legal fees, and it wasn't until the deaths of the children in Wapakika that they were forced to actually be legally bound to respond when a Jordan's Principle declaration is made. The situation facing children in Cat Lake is unacceptable in a country as rich as Canada. We saw children suffering from all manner of health and social health crisis. So we talked about it. The community decided to declare Jordan's Principle declaration because it forces the government to act. They have 12 hours to respond. Up till now, all we've gotten from the minister is vague talk from ministerial staff. They want to do something, they'll get back to us. We're 4 weeks into a state of emergency. It took the Jordan's Principle Declaration to actually light a fire and get them to start to send in medical teams. So now we need a medical assessment of the children. But how are we going to put the children back into mold-infested homes? They're going to continue to get sick. So we need the government to get serious about this being an emergency. It's not something that they're going to get to one day. They need to get to it now, and that's what we haven't seen from Seamus O'Regan or his staff.
Councillor Spence, Indigenous Services said they were expediting materials for a housing complex, providing other funding and supports for the nursing station. Has this happened, and if so, is it helping?
I haven't seen nothing come into our community as of yet, but they did say that they would commit to sending in materials to remediate some of the mold and get some of the problems fixed. Like I said, nothing has been done yet, and we're waiting on stuff to start coming in. As
MP Angus said, we're 4 weeks into this. Are you a little shocked that nothing has happened since the declaration of the state or an emergency was declared?
Well, personally, I think they're just flipping us around in circles here, and we're frustrated with how we're being treated, and we need something done. Our people are at stake here.
MP Angus, you represent a northern riding with a number of First Nations. How do you describe the housing conditions that you're seeing in other communities?
Well, I represent communities on the eastern side of Treaty 9, communities like Kashechewan, Attawapiskat, Port Albany, and we have gone through many similar crises. People remember the housing crisis of Attawapiskat in 2012, where under the Harper government we saw very much a similar response, which is they dragged and they delayed and they didn't seem to want to respond until it became actually an international embarrassment for the government. I'm asking Seamus O'Regan not to keep dragging this out like the previous government did. When there's a state of emergency declared, show some respect to the community and say, community doesn't wake up and declare a state of emergency to be a publicity stunt. It's because people's lives are at risk. So the communities that are in the western edge in Kenora region, which is under MP Bob Nault's riding, there are some very severe housing issues. Cat Lake is extreme, and the government needs to say, yes, people's lives are at risk. Yes, we will get to it, and yes, we will expedite a process. Right now, what we're getting is vague talk, and it seems they're more about protecting the minister than protecting the people.
We mentioned that this isn't a publicity show here, and you mentioned Bob Nault, who we did invite onto the show. Unfortunately, he was unavailable, but he said something about Cat Lake last week, saying it isn't a partisan political issue, and said, quote, "I think it's Charlie Angus over the top as he always is. That's Charlie Angus's style." What are your thoughts on comments like that during a time like this?
Well, I just think Bob Nault has a much thicker skin for the indifference of suffering for people in the north than I do. They declared a state of emergency. He's a member of parliament. What, he doesn't call them? He thinks everything was fine? We were 3 weeks into the state of emergency, and I was calling into Cat Lake because I was concerned, and they invited me to the community, and what I saw shocked me. So if Mr. Nault doesn't want to do the job, then get out of the way, but we got to get things done here. So he can attack me all he wants, but this community is at risk. This community did the right thing. They did the responsible thing of calling a state of emergency. Now the responsible thing for government is to actually show up and the minister to show up himself and see the situation and start to put some really concrete steps in place. And we still haven't got those concrete steps.
Councillor Spence, can you give us some indication of what this health crisis looks like for you in the community?
Well, day in, day out, we face at least one medevac out of the community every day, and there's a lot of kids that are suffering because they don't want to go to the clinic because they've been sent home so many times already. Not only children, but adults as well, and elders. And it's beginning to be a big problem, and this is one of the main reasons why we call the state of emergency, because a lot of our people are getting sick and dying from respiratory problems, and it's hard to watch our people suffer like this.
Councillor Spence, you've had members of the community pass away due to the crisis that's unfolding there?
Well, respiratory problems, right? A lot of our elders been going in and out of the nursing station with pneumonia, double pneumonia sometimes, and it leads to, I feel that it leads to long-term illnesses because they've been battling the illnesses for so long.
Councillor Spence, how many people would you say in the community are impacted by what's taking place?
I would say all of them, because our people are all closely related, and there's some that are really sick and have to be taken care of from family members, if not distant family members, and even people that work for the community.
I'd like to discuss the mental health issues that come about all this, but first we're just going to step aside, gentlemen, for a quick break, and then we'll continue our conversation here on housing on InFocus. And for our viewers and listeners on Element Radio in Toronto at 106.5 FM and Ottawa at 95.7 FM, you can join the conversation by calling 1-877-647-2786. We'll be right back.
Join our conversation now. You can call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like and watch us live on the APTN News Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, and send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back to In Focus, and we're going to go to some social media now to hear what you were saying about housing in your community, and there was a lot to say. One of the questions we asked was on Facebook was how you would improve housing in your community. And from Sarah here, trained, certified house inspectors for every band. There's a shortage, as I understand, making sure hired carpenters and etc. are doing the job effectively. Robert had this to say: housing dollars come from the government to Canada. In my opinion, a housing committee would benefit on how to manage and maintain First Nations housing without any political interference. From Cree, build on solid ground, not in swamps. And houses have names stuck to them. Why can't houses just be built and members can apply for housing? From L, trained, certified people to build them. Size appropriate homes, materials suitable for clients, forgivable loans to seniors and elders, rental decreases as incentives for proper maintenance. And from Carol, a better mix of unit types, senior and accessible units, bachelor units, etc., and more energy efficient alternative energy and innovative uses of materials. And from Josh, I mean, really, if the feds simply offered the same funding you see in municipalities, we wouldn't be having this issue. This isn't just dropping the materials off. I mean, finishing the job, building the houses. If you'd like to add your opinion to our topics of conversation, here's how.
Join our conversation now. You can call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like and watch us live on the APTN News Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, and send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca.
And before we return to our guests, earlier we spoke with Manitoba Regional Chief for the Assembly of First Nations, Kevin Hart. Here's that conversation. Regional Chief Hart, thanks for joining us. You hold the water, housing, and infrastructure among other portfolios for the Assembly of First Nations. How bad is the housing problem?
Well, right now, currently in Canada, we estimate, working with our Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure, there's an immediate need of 225,000 homes for all 634 First Nations across this country. If you look at that in comparison, if we were to build 10,000 homes for the next 20 years, it's just going to address the numbers we need right now here in 2019. So in 20 years' time, in 2039, we're going to have another backlog of infrastructure and housing that's old, inundated, is going to be in need of repair, as well as what you've seen in recent media is the current situation in regards to mold and its toxic effects on our people.
We are hearing and seeing a lot about mold. What are some of the other issues around housing that you've seen?
Well, right now, just the demand and the backlog that we see in housing right now, probably 85% of all homes on First Nations are in need of some type of repair. 15% of those homes are, people are living in homes that have been condemned, even though with the chronic need and the living conditions of our First Nations, we have upwards of 20 people living in a 3-bedroom home where they take shifts to sleep and such. And you see right now when we talk about climate change and that and how that has an effect on our health determinants when we talk about our housing situation and our housing crisis in Canada, that the linkages between health, social determinants and that have a lasting effect when it comes to the housing condition on First Nations.
Some have told me that there actually has been some improvements in recent years. Would you agree with that?
Well, you know, with myself, I've obviously been lobbying and advocating to this federal government to bring initiatives when it comes into housing and housing stock needs in the different regions across Canada, including Manitoba, that has probably the worst situation when it comes to the needs of housing, water, and infrastructure across Canada. There's been resources, there's been capacity, there's been investments that have been happening in the last couple of years that have been unprecedented in the last 10 years under the previous federal government. So there's progress. It's slow, yes, but this is like throwing a penny in a bucket, basically. For us to address the situation right now here in Manitoba alone, we need probably around, it's estimated about $3 billion and upwards just for housing alone. That doesn't address the need when it comes to clean and safe drinking water in our communities or the infrastructure that's needed also to back up the housing if we were to build those houses tomorrow.
And so what needs to be done, Regional Chief, and how fast?
Well, obviously we need big investments by this federal government. They have to be everlasting, you know, to empower our youth and those that are looking for employment, but at the same time returning those economies back to the First Nations themselves. You've seen in recent studies that have been done by the Southern Chiefs Organization as well as the Manitoba Kiwet Noe Okimakanak is that we're in upwards of a $9 billion industry here in Manitoba alone. If you look at housing and the housing needs that we have as well, you know, it's a known fact that for us as First Nations, there's not too many out there that own a lumber company, that own the companies that supply the very nail, the concrete, et cetera, that's needed in our First Nations. So, you know, I've challenged governments, I've challenged the companies themselves to work with us as First Nations because we want to participate in these economies moving forward so that those dollars are staying within the First Nation and not going out. Because if you look at the $9 billion industry that we're lucky if 99.9% or that fraction, that 0.1% stays within the actual First Nation, but 99% of it is going outwards of the First Nation to this day.
Regional Chief, we'll have to leave it there, but I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you. Take care.
MP Angus, as you're hearing there, the AFN estimates about 85% of housing on First Nations is in need of repair. I believe the number is like 225,000 homes or something like that. The parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Indigenous Affairs said they're investing $17 billion overall, including into housing. A lot of that's back-ended money, though, right? That isn't actually going to start flowing until after this next election?
Well, I think we have to always be very cynical about any government promises on Indigenous spending. This government, the last government, the government before it, they always say record spending. Go try and find where that money ended up. Most of it never got out the door and just went back into Treasury Board. So a lot of this money is promised, but it's not on the ground. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister stood up in the House of Commons and thanked his own government for ending the long-term boiled water advisory for the people in Cat Lake. Well, Cat Lake's never had a problem with boiled water advisories. They have a problem with housing. So they make promises and they don't deliver. But I think there's bigger systemic issues that are not being addressed by government, which is we have a model for housing that, Indian Affairs has always promoted, which are the sort of the crappy housing that falls apart as soon as the contractor leaves, that are underfunded in terms of the actual cost of the building, so they're using substandard materials, so that they're not sustainable in the long term. We have really good models out there for building sustainable northern communities. We're a northern nation, and we can't seem to build houses that last in northern climates. I think that if we're going to start talking about a rethink, we, number one, need to start building houses that are appropriate, put actual budgets that meet the needs to do it, and as well as the Grand Chief said, we need to be training people in the communities and in the territories so that we start to build a whole construction expertise of training and skills to maintain and build and look after houses. That's where we start to move forward, I think, with a vision as opposed to what we've got now, which is, badly maintained Band-Aids.
Councillor Spence, the minister, Seamus O'Regan, has pledged to come to the community. How important is that to have the minister visit the community and see what's happening?
It's very important because he needs to see for himself firsthand what we're facing and what's causing, because it is a big issue, and if he says it's important to him and he hears us loud and clear, I don't see why he's not here yet.
Yeah, there's also supposed to be a meeting with the minister and the national chief of the AFN in Thunder Bay. Any word on when that might be taking place?
Well, it was said it would be next week on Wednesday, but nothing has been confirmed yet. So,
how frustrating is this for yourself, the leadership, the community, to have these pledges, these promises, and nothing's taking place here?
Well, it's something that's been going on for a long time now, and we are used to it, but we're starting to take steps to try and make them move as fast as they can, because our people are at stake here, and it's time that we get heard.
We've got a caller on the line that I'm going to go to in a second, but I just wanted to ask you, Councillor Spence, what has been the toll, do you think, on the mental health of people in the community with all this?
There's been a toll on them because they're expecting the help as promised, but there's nothing has been done, and we're hoping that things start moving quick, because we only have maybe a month left on a winter road, and we need to get materials in, or it's going to cost even more to get these things in by air.
MP Angus, what have you seen in communities that have poor housing conditions in terms of how that affects people's mental health?
Well, I think if you look at the homes that people are living in, when you have people sleeping in shift, and sometimes, as has been said, 18, 20 people in homes, that's a huge impact. It has a huge health impact. People get sick. For young people, it certainly has mental health issues. And we talk about, you can overlay the suicide crisis that we're seeing in far northern communities on the communities that have some of the worst housing. And it destroys the spirit of young people. It destroys their vision of a future. And to me, this is the most unconscionable thing. How can a nation as rich as Canada leave its young children without hope? Well, you see it when you come into these communities in the kind of squalid housing that people are being forced to live in. So the housing issue plays into the health issue, which plays into the mental health issue, which plays into the suicide crisis.
I want to get into some possible fixes here, and I understand we have a caller on the line, Pauline, who is calling us from Ontario, who has some ideas of her own on how to improve the situation. Pauline, go ahead.
Hi, I'm glad to have my voice heard out there, because for years and years it's not something new, this thing. All the way across Canada, the housing situation for our Indigenous people, as far as I'm concerned, is like third world countries, other than some of them are warmer than Canada is. And there's new housing being built for people with very big allergies, made out of great big bales of hay. And then they're plastered over, and there's zero allergies in those homes. And they don't vent the places very well. They don't put plastic over the insulation like it should be. Like, there's many things when they're building them that they have to consider and put it in there, but they're not doing it. And that's why all these houses are getting moldy and children are so sick and the elderly. I've seen that in my own community in Raymond with the old farmhouses. The floors were made out of dirt, so all the spores in the dirt plus the wood you bring in for the winter to keep dry, it all causes black mold, and that stuff's highly toxic.
You bet. Pauline, we're going to hear from a family deeply affected by mold coming up a little later here. Appreciate you calling. I understand we have another caller on the line with us here. Dave from Alberta, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I guess that was Dave. Pauline, are you now joining us?
No, I think this is Dave.
Okay, Dave, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Well, I really listening here is probably just going to echo a lot on what's already been said. I'm an individual. When I was younger, I come from a family that left the reserve. My mother was Native and chose to leave because of a lot of the conditions that, like people have said, have been long-standing. Things like drinking rainwater and outhouses are still very commonplace in a lot of these communities. So when they talk about like boiled water advisories and stuff, this you know, it's really a Band-Aid, like what people have been saying. They have to get into these communities and they have to start showing these people that there are other options, right? And there has to be some kind of oversight to ensure that the money and stuff allotted to this does actually make it all the way to the end. You know, I've heard it a lot of times, the chief's driveway is always paved, right? And it's just kind of indicative of how it works when money comes to a reserve, is it does do some things, but it doesn't necessarily make it all the way to the people that need it, right?
Dave, appreciate your thoughts and you calling in. Councillor Spence, I mean, the community has plans, right? You guys have a plan. You know what needs to be done, correct?
Yes, we do. We gave them all the information they needed, and they said they would take it back and look it over. And we have all our ducks in order. We're just waiting for the go-ahead.
MP Angus, you know, reading back on some of these reports, and there are numerous, whether they come from the communities or Senate housing committees, many committees. One of the things that was common in them was that leadership in the communities say, we have the solutions here, but nobody's listening to us.
Well, at the end of the day, until we start to dismantle the Department of Indian Affairs, we're never going to get anywhere. I mean, this is a colonial construct. This is the fundamental problem. These communities are under the thumb of Indian Affairs. Indian Affairs makes all the decisions. I had a fascinating trip into Saskatchewan one time with the former head of the Royal Institute of Architecture, who was Japanese-Canadian, and he said he wanted to come to Saskatchewan because his mother saw a picture of it, and she grew up at a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and she said, these communities look like where I grew up, a prisoner of war camp. And when we walked into Saskatchewan, he said to me, this is not constructed as a community. This was constructed as an internal displacement camp. You know, Cat Lake is in Treaty 9, which transferred some of the richest silver, gold, iron, copper, diamond, hydro, lumber that turned Ontario into a powerhouse. And what happened to the people? They were forcibly taken off the land. Their children were taken from them, and they were put into communities that have never been able to grow or to have the power to make the decision-making to build healthy communities. So yeah, the communities know what needs to be done, but they're always having to go to the minister. They're always having to go to the senior bureaucrats, and the senior bureaucrats put a lid on everything because they don't want to spend the money that's needed to rebuild proper holistic communities. So that's the power structure issue that has to be addressed, and it has to be on the table when we talk about making livable communities.
We're going to be heading to a break here soon, but Councillor Spence, I was wondering if in the short time we still have left with you, if you could, what's your message to government right now with the crisis that's unfolding?
Yes, I can say a few words, and I'm going to call out the government and come here, look for yourself, see what our people health is going through, and see for yourself and we're crying out for help here. We shouldn't have to be crying out for help that was promised to us years and years ago. And it's time that the government starts taking the steps forward to helping our people and honoring those treaty rights that were promised.
Councillor Spence, appreciate that, and we wish you the best, and appreciate both you and MP Charlie Angus for joining us here today. Our viewers and our listeners on Element Radio in Toronto and at 106.5 FM in Ottawa at 95.7 FM can join the conversation by calling 1-877-647-2786. When we come back, we will be joined by Selena Castell. Her son, River, is experiencing devastating health effects that are believed to be related to mold exposure. She's also a former housing manager for Matthias Cologne Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. We'll have that conversation when we return. Welcome back to In Focus, where this week we're putting the housing crisis on First Nations in focus, and we're joined now by Selena Castell. Selena, originally from Matthias Cologne, also known by many as Pucketawagan here in northern Manitoba. Just wondering if you could tell us a bit about your son. We'll have some video and photos here of River and why you believe his health issues are related to exposure to mold.
Well, it was just recently we just found out that my son was diagnosed to, well, the doctor spoke about that my son was environmental sickness. It baffled us, and then also it was shocking to hear this type of sickness to a child. In this day and age, there shouldn't have been, a child within that state to have that type of sickness. I never heard of environmental sickness because we went through genetics testing and they couldn't find nothing for the past 2 years of him being in a hospital. In December 2016, he went in the hospital for a minor dental surgery. Then he had complication within the respiratory. Then he ended up catching pneumonia. Then from then on, he decided, it's like he went downhill since then. He went into a coma. It sedated him. And there was a lot of issues that happened to my son. The first year in 2016, that year, he started having seizures. And nobody doesn't know, the body's a mystery. Mm-hmm. And them telling us the fact that my son was, and is leaving us anytime soon because he's on palliative care now, because there's nothing they can do for my son. And then when we heard about, osteoporosis was another one. The defects of neurological effects, respiratory effects are all directed to mold. And not only that, us also hearing about the water in the lead. That also directs us to osteoporosis, which my son has. He used to run around, used to chase after him. Now he's bed rest, deteriorating on us from the inside.
Can you talk about what the connection you believe is between the mold and the troubles that River's now having?
Okay, that classroom that he was in, right beside the human resources, is where they found stachybacchus. That's the mold that, when we heard about that, we started digging around and researching what this affect to a person. And, all the pinpoints, neurological effects, respiratory effects, and Rivers has seizures. He hasn't had a seizure since April of 2018. We sustained it. And for him, it's so, it's hard for us parents to go through this. You know, we went through this before with our late sons. In 2008, we lost 3 boys, our family. 3 precious boys due to housing that was, you know, deteriorating also. And it's hard to, you know, to grasp that your child's leaving you soon. You know, every day we wake up thanking the Creator, He's up and alive with us. You know, our baby's like is a gift because of his effects, because he's a disability. He's also a Jordan's principal statistic. He was in the same room that little Jordan was in. And you know, it's baffling to see your son deteriorate on you.
As APTN has been reporting, the school in Puckatawagan is closed down, has been since December due to mold, remains closed down. Selena, you've had to leave the community because of the need to care for your son. But
yeah, we had to relocate from an isolation reserve to the city. We had to grasp, you know, to adapt to the city life, but it was a very hard road. And then the school closure was a total shock to hear that, you know, mold is one of the biggest things, plus the lead. And the another one that was brought to our attention was the asbestos, because that's one of the major, you know, issues that was from the last school that we had, where I went to school at. Besides the PCB and, you know, the asbestos was one of the biggest things that us kids at that time were breathing in and playing around in.
Given what's happened to your son and the conditions of the school, it's supposed to return later this month. Would you want to feel comfortable if you were still living in the community sending your kid back to that school?
No, because once you have that that mold within the housing, you have to take all the structure out, start cleaning it from there. And if it's, you know, they said that it came from the vents, and then, you know, I don't know. And so it's still, we're still in, you know, trying to grasp the attention. I don't know what my band is doing. You know, they have to be really transparent with one another. You know, start working together instead of pinpointing each other who's to blame. You know what? You know, children are affected with this because Puck has a high rate of kids that have autistics, you know, neurological sicknesses, and this is like there should have been already a plan set for their community, you know, to get health assessments done with their community in each household, especially the high rate of cancer that we have in our community. And it was already documented 30 years ago that we're going to have a high rate of cancer. Now we have a high rate of autistic kids. We also have starting to get a high rate of lupus. And that's all related.
Selena, you're a former housing manager, and I'd like to talk about that in a minute, but I understand we have a caller on the line, Mike, joining us. Mike, are you there?
Yes. My name's Mike. I'm from Ontario. I'm interested in who to contact for information on not only the mold, but other construction problems needed on reservations, like clean water, sanitation, health department, and housing. I'm a 25-year reinforcing iron worker. I can do foundations, bridges, dams, whatever, and I'm interested in what I can do to help out.
Well, Mike, that's awfully nice of you, and I hope our producers there can give you some info when you get off the line. Appreciate you calling in with an offer like that. Selena, as we said, you know, you were a housing manager in the community. How would you describe the conditions in Puckatawagan?
Well, the conditions with the houses back home is just like the structure at that time, the CMHC housing buildings, you know, they were basically, they weren't built for the north. They were built more like the southern, area where the adaptation to the warmer climate. But with with the such poor quality of lumbers in the north, plus we have to think about the isolation. Bringing in the lumber into our communities, at that time was hard because you only had one transportation at that time, was the train. Mm-hmm. And being a housing manager, there was a lot to deal with. The public, which houses to go after, going after CMHC to get the RAP units done. Not only did to deal with that, we had to deal with the insurances, mortgage payments. It only gives a little amount of funding for for the housing management to deal with in trying to do some renovations for these units.
Right.
And then also you have to think about the electrical people, the plumbing, and your carpenters. Most of them are all from our community that just are starting to, that had some experience, and and also we did start getting programs for our people back home to get their carpentry level done for them, right, which was a success. Mississippi Construction was one of the biggest ones that helped us out. We teamed up, and employment and training, and getting these programs going for our people.
Selena, was it a difficult decision for you and your family to have to leave?
It was the hardest decision to leave, because when it comes to your child, you'll do anything. And anything in your power to make sure your child's with you, and to figure out exactly what's wrong with your son. Because we want answers. Why is my son deteriorating? Now that they can't do nothing for my son, we spoke to the palliative care unit to do an autopsy on him, and now we found out pathologist is going to be doing that. We're going to be bringing my son home in a casket instead of bringing him home alive. And it's hard to deal with that. As a mother of losing children before, I was housing manager at that time when my boys passed on. But I was dealing with my son that got sick with that cryptosporidium at that time too. There's so many things happening to us. Now with River now, I don't know what's hard, losing kids in a fire, or losing day by day with our son. It is so hard, plus being told you can't work. You have to look after your son 24 hours. Mm-hmm. It is something you don't want another parent to go through, and especially hearing that your child's dying because of the environment. It's hard to hear that.
Yeah, Selena, it must be hard for you to speak out as well, and we sure do appreciate that you've been willing to and to come and share your stories here with us.
It is hard, especially when you hear about this, this mold that, that kills people. It also psychologically does affect you big time. And, we have to start working and to be transparent and accountable within our community, or even the outside. There's always been red tapes.
Yeah. Well, Selena, we do appreciate you coming in and speaking with us here today. And if you want to find out more about River and Selena and the family, you can check our website, aptnnews.ca, where there'll be more details coming in the coming days. This episode here will also be available for download as a podcast and on our website as well at aptnnews.ca/podcast. And if you've missed any of the shows and you want to catch up, you can check out the website, aptnnews.ca. Special thanks this week to Beverly Andrews, Charmaine Straker, Kathleen Martins, and Martha Troyan for helping us to our guests. Selena, very much appreciative of you coming in. I'm Dennis Ward. Your regular host, Melissa Ridgen, will be back next week where they will be putting food sovereignty in focus. Thanks for tuning in.